These aren't poker faces, we're frozen. I'm Charlie Sykes, and Sunday Insight starts right now. Good morning and welcome to Sunday Insight. In the week that was, the GOP candidates tussle in their 6th debate. Polls tighten in the Democratic race, and we're just 3 weeks away from the Iowa caucuses. No one here won the Powerball, otherwise we wouldn't be here, would we? President Obama delivered his final State of the Union address. Iran seized then released 10 American sailors, thank you for the hospitality, and music icon David Bowie dies at the age of 69. But we start with some new rules on sportsmanship. The Wisconsin Interscholastic Athletic Association, the WIAA, sparked a national backlash with a memo calling for a crackdown on fans chanting things like airball at high school games. Other hurtful words that were singled out: sieve, scoreboard, fundamentals. Now, the WIAA has already issued warnings about allowing students who chant USA, USA, or who do things like the wave. Well, faced with national ridicule, the WIAA insisted that it wasn't really banning anything, but it certainly sounded like a ban, or at least a bad case of overprotective nannyism. The story made news when a basketball player in Hilbert named April Gale was suspended for 5 games for tweeting out some blunt criticism of the new policy. Other students also joined in protests, including these students up in Ashwaubenon. Joining me on our panel this morning, the Milwaukee Community Journal's Michael Holt, former State Representative Michelle Litchens, political strategist Linda Bruin, and the managing editor of RateWisconsin.com, Colin Roth. Your take on these new WIAA rules? We're all in favor of sportsmanship, right, Michelle Litchens?
We are in favor of sportsmanship, but I believe locally they need to make those decisions. You know, if they hear somebody cheer something that's inappropriate, you know, that sports director, athletic director is going to go over and tell those kids to stop saying that. The WIAA has overstepped their bounds. They look like idiots out there, and they need to retract what they did.
Okay, you usually like these nanny policies, though, right, Linda Bruin?
No. I mean, it's made the WIAA a national laughingstock, and I think that's a real problem. I got to read you this one acceptable WIAA chant that a guy named Jay Bylis wrote up. We hope for a positive outcome while fully realizing that the result is not a negative reflection upon our guest. Can you imagine high school students chanting that? I mean, it's ridiculous.
Well, there's a couple of things about this. You know, first of all, you know, are high school athletes really crushed by airball? I mean, do they really? Are their feelings hurt?
Yeah, they're melting.
But think about the assumption here. This assumption that these students are so fragile and frail that they are in fact snowflakes. But the other question is, did the people sitting around the WIAA, the great minds there, didn't anybody say, hey, you know what, maybe we ought to, I don't know, let kids have some fun? We would look silly if this came out. Your take on this? How does something like this happen?
Yeah, what's that next, the chant that says, we just hope no one gets hurt, right? You know, that's cheering for the refs or something. But yeah, this is clearly the bubble wrap nannyism gone too far. There's a place for, you know, ensuring that there's no vulgarity, but, you know, you gotta let people have some fun at some of these events.
You know, this is really about freedom of speech, which raises the question, if the parents of the young lady who tweeted about the policy and was suspended, if she sues, won't it?
Well, it does raise an interesting question. I mean, she did use a vulgarity into this tweet, but it of course, is not on school property. Right. So are they going to suspend everybody that uses a bad word in any context?
But there's a flip side, too, though.
Right.
There's a flip side. And the flip side is, when my son was playing for Mesmer, I attended every game. And sometimes they went to games where people were shouting some racial obscenities.
Okay, now see, I think there's a line there that if somebody is shouting racial obscenities, I do think it's the responsibility of the school to step in. But the thing here is the inability to draw the line between the genuinely offensive and things like, I mean, I didn't know that the wave was banned. Apparently you can't boo in any way whatsoever, or to say scoreboard or I mean, the creativity here. I also thought it was interesting that they decided that they were going to be discouraging USA, USA because they think it stands for something else. Now, here's the problem. How do you enforce that? I just am imagining that students from now on, because they are in fact somewhat creative, that when something bad happens, you should just simply chant WIAA, WIAA, WI. Well, you mentioned this.
They'll come up with an acronym.
They'll come up with it.
They will. Leave it to a teenager.
I'm thinking of the acronym right now, but I won't say it. And if somebody says, "What are you chanting here?" I'd say, "Well, Wisconsin Interscholastic Athletic Association. How do you know the difference?" But we've had all of these debates about these snowflakes on university campuses and how frail and fragile students are, and we wonder where do they come from. Well, this is the kind of mentality. But also, Dale Coing, a state representative, wrote an interesting letter, and he was a high school athlete, 6'7" high school athlete, and he admits that when he was in a basketball game, he wasn't that good. And occasionally he would take a shot, and he would occasionally miss the backboard, and people would chant air ball. And rather, though, than curl up in the fetal position, he said, it made him work hard. And I guess this reluctance on the part of adults to allow, first of all, just kids to work things out, but also to experience a little bit of adversity.
And that like you said, we see this all the way through college students now and beyond, where businesses are hiring people and they have to deal with parents. They have to hire human resource staff to deal with parents because they're still trying to shield their children. We are not doing our children any services by trying to protect them.
Yeah, well, then my advice would be that the next time the WIA sits down and comes up with something like this, that you have at least one normal human being in the room who is encouraged to raise their hand and say, do you know how this will play out? Do you really want to make the New York Times and Sports Illustrated and ESPN? Okay, what has your glass half full? What has your glass half empty this week? Let's go around the table. Michael Holt, you're first.
Well, my glass is half empty because 2 Republican lawmakers have introduced a proposal that allows people to carry guns on school properties. My glass is half full because even though this current batch of state Republicans is not in tune with reality, I assume they will succumb to the public pressure and withdraw this idiotic proposal.
Michelle Litchens.
It is half full because Congressman Sean Duffy spoke the ugly truth that there were more African-American abortions in New York City last year than live births. It's half empty because Gwen Moore doesn't care about all black lives and is asking for Duffy's condemnation.
Linda Bruin.
Well, my glass is half full because Governor Walker was right not to pardon Stephen Avery, but it's half empty because his blanket refusal to ever consider issuing any pardon is extreme. Pardons should be rare, but stay an option.
Colin Roth.
My glass is half full because none of the 10 U.S. service members taken by Iran this week were harmed. It's half empty because the Obama administration tried to spin this as a diplomatic success and not the humiliation that everyone knows it was.
Now, well, my glass is half full because Governor Scott Walker is addressing the question of college affordability. That's a huge issue, and I've written a book about it. It's half empty, though, because the plan could have been bigger and bolder by addressing the underlying cost of college, including its bloated spending on administrators and Taj Mahal building projects. Next on Sunday Insight, making a murderer. Is there any reason for the governor to pardon Stephen Avery? Well, that controversy over the chants at high school games was not the only local story that got national attention last week. Fallout from the documentary on the Stephen Avery case continues with more calls for Governor Scott Walker to intervene in the case. Avery and his nephew, Brendan Dassey, were convicted back in 2007 of the murder of Teresa Halbach. But the documentary, Making a Murderer, raises questions about the investigation and the prosecution. Governor Scott Walker has rejected suggestions he intervene, with a spokesman saying, those who feel they have been wrongly convicted can seek to have their convictions overturned by a higher court. But last week, the liberal Madison paper, that's kind of redundant, isn't it? The Capital Times ripped Walker for what it said was his unpardonable disregard for his duty. So do you agree with the Cap Times and apparently Linda Bruin a little bit about the governor's approach to pardons?
I don't think he should have a blanket approach to pardons. I think it should be rare, and I think it's something that should be taken on a case-by-case basis. But in terms of the Stephen Avery pardon, I don't think there's been, and the Attorney General addressed this week, that there has to be some sort of new evidence in order to precipitate this. Now, the documentary, I've seen it. It raises a lot of questions about whether the trial was fair, and certainly raises a lot of interesting, thought-provoking questions, but there's been no new evidence that would exonerate Avery.
This is an important point, that all of the evidence was presented at the trial and that was considered by the jury.
And a lot of these things have gone through the appeals process. They've been looked at by appellate courts. courts, and they've been rejected.
Okay, so why do you think the governor is right in not pardoning Stephen Avery?
Well, because I totally agree that there hasn't been any new evidence, and the claims in the documentary that the police were planting evidence have no foundation, and there was a lot of information and evidence that they didn't put in that would actually show that Avery, was potentially guilty. So I think that's a problem. On the other hand, there's been over 50 people released from death row after DNA exonerated them. So that's why I think that there should be, at times, a presidential or a governor pardon. But I think the governor was at least right when he came into office and said, look, some of these governors are pardoning 200 people. That's ridiculous.
Michelle Litchens.
Yes, and 1 million people watching a movie that only gave one side of the story is not enough reason for the governor to pardon someone. Again, they need to have something new, and obviously all the evidence that they have shown said that he was guilty.
Michael Holt.
Well, there is new evidence, because Avery just said that the victim's brother is guilty, his brother is guilty, Santa Claus is guilty,
his cellmate is
his
guilty.
cellmate is guilty. So I mean,
I'm not sure that that's the actual definition of evidence, however. What I find really extraordinary about this is that people actually seriously think that you should have the President of the United States or the governor take a legal action based on a Netflix documentary. No disrespect for the documentary, but really,
a one-sided documentary.
A one-sided documentary. And I was really struck by the interview that I heard on the Nancy Grace show this last week from his Stephen Avery's former fiance, who was absolutely convinced that he did it because she knows what a monster the guy was. How he threatened her and beat her and abused her, and just her sense of what a monster. And I wonder whether or not, if the documentary makers had included that kind of commentary, those kinds of interviews, that would be people around this country who somehow think, oh, poor Stephen Avery, he was an innocent victim. I mean, the man was a monster. The evidence that was evaluated in a court of law was persuasive beyond a reasonable doubt to that jury that he was guilty. And I don't know how Walker could do anything other than what he did. Now, if in fact they do have new evidence, then sure, bring it to the courts and have them decide to do it. But there's somehow the notion that you watch a television show and, by God, yes, let's have the governor free the guy. You may not want to hear it, but we'll tell you anyway. Let's hand out some unsolicited advice. Michael Holt, you go first again.
Well, a young relative of mine left her car running in the driveway during last week's cold streak. I don't have to tell you what happened. I know it's Wisconsin winter, but don't leave your car running unattended.
Well, at least not in the city of Milwaukee. Michelle Litchens.
To the WIAA, save face and apologize for being stupid and rescind your new rules regarding student chants.
Linda Bruin.
Well, my advice is to Ann Coulter, who said Governor Nikki Haley is a dumb bimbo who was elected because she's pretty, after Haley mildly rebuked Coulter's friend Donald Trump. And issuing sexist insults won't get women voters to support Trump.
Colin Roth.
Hey, my advice is for any who are Republican establishment types: unite behind Marco Rubio or face the prospect of a Donald Trump or Ted Cruz nomination.
Well, my advice is next time there's a big Powerball jackpot, don't spend all of your money, your rent money, on buying tickets, because for those of you who are a little shaky on the math, the odds are about 200 million to 1 against you. Next on Sunday Insight, look at Paul Ryan. Would you play poker with that guy?
It doesn't.
You think you had a tough week? Now think about Paul Ryan, who sat behind President Obama for an hour and kept a poker face. He says his wife told him to practice that. And just try that. Try that sometime, because it's really not as easy as you might think. Also last week, there was some buzz among Tea Party conservatives they might back a primary challenge to Ryan this year. Some of them were unhappy with the pricey omnibus spending package, but the buzz seems confined to social media and national publications that don't really seem to have a handle on local politics around here. So I guess the question, Linda Bruin, you watch these things, how serious is this talk of primarying Paul Ryan?
Not at all.
No.
I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous. Only one Wisconsin U.S. House representative has lost a renomination bid since 1950, and the next one will not be Paul Ryan. He had 94% in his primary in 2014. He's actually more popular nationally than anyone who's running for president on either side of the aisle.
Well, I mean, I guess the model is, Eric Cantor was the majority leader in the House. Nobody thought that he was vulnerable. They ran a Tea Party candidate, talk radio, beat him up, and Eric Cantor's out of a job.
But Eric Cantor is an arrogant jerk, and Paul Ryan isn't.
That's exactly
So.
right.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, yeah.
Eric Cantor wasn't at home.
Yeah.
Paul Ryan's made that point that he will be in his district, and in order even to take the job as speaker, he said, I want to be home with my family. I want to be back in my district. That's the difference. People see Paul Ryan out. He is the most personable person you will ever run into. He's a genuine guy, and there might be some angry voice out there that decides to primary him, but he's not going to have any support.
Well, you know, the guys that get in trouble are the people who lose touch with their hometown. They don't come back to, but that's not Paul Ryan.
No,
so, I mean,
no,
that's,
and I agree with Lynn. You know, I think he's safe. You know, and I actually expressed some support and respect, at least, for him when he presented this litany of ideals to arrest poverty. Right. But I watched him sitting behind the president, and he upset me. I mean, those arrogant stares that, you're
getting kind of sensitive. 'Cause I remember when you were a little bit tougher. You were upset by his facial expression.
Absolutely.
You know how old
because
I
he
am?
spoke for the whole Republican Party. That was one of the most disrespectful displays.
You know how old I am? I remember when it took more than that to get you upset. Really? Okay.
Yeah, primaries require candidates, and until there's any real sense of a candidacy, there's no such thing as a Paul Ryan primary effort. That said, Paul Ryan took this job as Speaker. He understands the dynamics and the raucousness of the kind of the modern Republican Party and broader conservative movement. And this has kind of become a reality of Republican politics. If you're seen as the establishment, if you're the face of things like these omnibus bills, things that he did have to shepherd through, even though some of the details as far as it was kind of put on his plate, this comes with the territory now. And maybe it's not this time, but it'll likely be down the line at some point.
Yeah, one of the things that you and I both wrote, the State of Wisconsin Conservatism, in preview of the governor's State of the State address, and I'm still struck by the fact that Wisconsin has not had the kinds of divisions that we've seen in other states. There are obviously internal debates about tactics here in Wisconsin, but we haven't had the kind of really visceral division that we've had here. I also think it's rather relevant that the Tea Party activists who are talking about primarying Paul Ryan are not from around here. They're not even from this part of the state. And I try to point this out to some of the national guys who I'm not really sure understand, the geography of Wisconsin. So what is it you don't get? Let's go around the table. Michael Holt, you're first.
Well, what I don't get is how this so-called progressive arm of the state Democratic Party feels it can dictate who should represent the black community. Their latest ploy is to run Mandela Barnes against Lena Taylor because she's too black and puts her people before the party. Stay tuned, because I'm just warming up.
Michelle Hitchens.
Charlie, I don't get what's going on with the stock market. I don't.
It's going down. Linda Bruin.
Charlie, I don't get why 7% of Americans think that Paul Ryan growing a beard means he's converting to Islam. It's sad when people are so uneducated, prejudiced, and afraid that they believe a beard makes someone Muslim.
Okay, so Colin, say it's not so.
It's not so. What I don't get is how the Bucks thought it was a good idea to hire Mike Tate as a lobbyist. Mike Tate, the guy who organized the recall of key Republican figures who helped shepherd through the arena deal.
Well, last week, Al Jazeera America announced that it was shutting down. Now, what I don't get is who thought it was a good idea to invest hundreds of millions of dollars and hire more than 600 people for a network that only had about 30,000 viewers nationwide. Next on Sunday Inside, our panel picks the winners and losers of the week. But first, here's your morning news update. It's time for our panel to pick the winners and losers of the week. Michael Holt, you're first again.
Well, winner, Andre Lee Ellis, founder of We Get This youth initiative, who was honored on the Steve Harvey show last Monday. It was well deserved. And for the second straight week, my loser is State Representative Bob Gammon. 2 weeks ago, he made a racist statement, and last week, he flipped a bird at Representative Peter Baca. The question is, why wasn't he censored?
Michelle Hitchens.
Well, you did have to apologize, but my winner is South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley. In her State of the Union response, she called out the Republican angry voices and also said the GOP is also to blame for the problems in Washington. She is a smart and articulate woman, and I'm so excited the rest of the country got to see that too. My losers are the angry voices who said Nikki Haley should be deported for her comments on immigration. Those angry people need to remember they probably wouldn't be here without their immigrant ancestors.
Linda Bruin.
Well, my winners are the healthcare workers who made it possible for the World Health Organization to announce last week that the Ebola epidemic is finally over. Their courage and dedication has defeated a disease that infected more than 30,000 people, killed over 11,300, and resulted in 23,000 children losing a parent. My loser is the World Health Organization, who delayed declaring an international emergency for political and economic reasons and acknowledged their devastating failure to organize a rapid and strong response. Yet none of their senior staff who oversaw the Ebola response have been fired or even disciplined.
Colin Roth.
My winners this week are Donald Trump and Ted Cruz. They went at each other this week during the Republican debate, but I think they proved that they are the guys to beat. My loser is Congresswoman Glenn Moore, who lashed out at Congressman Sean Duffy and accused him of racism for his accurate and compelling remarks on abortion.
Well, my loser, your 401k, the stock market. Sheesh. Winner, Packer fans who get to relive the glory days by watching the NFL Films recreation of the very first Super Bowl. Get your geek on and watch it. Thanks for joining us and joining my radio show Monday morning on News Radio 620 WTMJ from 8:30 until noon. Have a great week.